Ecuador in Spanish means what?
Oh, yeah.
Equator.
The equator.
Yeah.
So if you can find the equator in South America, you'll find
And there's some chairs
Ecuador.
right back there.
Hello, how are you this evening?
How are you?
The,
Do they speak Spanish in Ecuador?
yes, yeah, and they're 99% Catholic as well, not surprisingly. Quito is the capital city here. You're 3,300 miles from Maine by plane. It's actually a very pleasant trip because there's only 1 hour time change from here. You know, Maine sits up here. We think of it possibly as being over here, but it's not. So it's a pretty easy journey.
But how many flights?
A simple flight to Miami and then another simple flight down to Quito. There's 2 major airports in Quito. There's in Ecuador, excuse me, Quito here, and then Guayaquil on the coast, where a lot of people fly into if they're going on to the Galapagos. Interesting, it's 105,000 square miles, 3 times the size of Maine. So it's not small in that scheme of things. But their coastline is 1/3 of Maine's coastline. So we're blessed with a lot of ocean frontage. Relatively small population, 17 million. The highest peak is over 20,000 feet. And you know, the Andes are just beautiful. Like the Rockies, they're young mountains, still pushing up because of the ring of fire that you've seen on TV, the glacial, or excuse me, the plates of the earth coming together and pushing up. It's the 2nd highest capital in the world, capital city. Anybody know the highest capital city?
Mexico City?
La Paz. That's over 11,000 feet. I can tell you at 9,400 feet, there's plenty of altitude change for those of us who live on the ocean. From a wildlife standpoint, it's amazing. It's number 3 or 4 in the world for the number of bird species. So I just wanted to outline for you the places where we went on the mainland. Don't worry, we're going to get to the Galapagos, but we had really 3 vacations within one here. Landed in Quito. There's some nice sights there, which I'll show you. That's 2.8 million people, so it's not an overwhelming number, but it's a sizable city and strung out along this huge valley. I'll show you pictures in a minute. It was one of the first World Cultural Heritage Sites. So it's a beautiful city. You know, there's a lot of reasons to go to Quito on its own, forget the wildlife. At one point we went to Coca, a very small town of about 20,000 people. You fly there from Quito, and that's the gateway to the Amazon basin in that part of Ecuador. You can see all these blue lines. All of those are rivers that flow into the Amazon basin many miles away from Ecuador, of course. And then there's 3 rivers that come together there. It's a pretty cool place. Another place we went is the Papayacta Pass. That goes over 12,500 feet, and the volcano which you saw here is 19,000 feet. I spent a day wandering around up there, very specific country up there, and very specific wildlife, beautiful place. And then later in the trip, I had a day here down in the kind of the foothills of the Andes, although it's still 6,000 feet in elevation, at a couple of preserves, bird preserves that are just mind-boggling. I saw over 100 species of birds on this day. About 65 of them were brand new for me, so it was really exciting. There are familiar species down there. It's important to remember that some of the birds we see here migrate all the way down to Ecuador. Some of them go to southern Argentina, if you can imagine that. An Arctic tern will go from here to Antarctica, 50,000 miles in 1 year. So going to Ecuador isn't that big a deal. There's ospreys, we saw them, we saw sharp-shinned hawk, and we saw great blue herons, including in the Galapagos. It seemed funny to see birds like that there. Quito itself, as I mentioned, is gorgeous. There's no doubt a lot of cultural and heritage sites there. The people are a mix of cultures, of course, but most of them are Indian, and they were ruled by the Mayans at one point, but they had their own culture long before the Mayans showed up. The street markets are just unbelievable. I mean, fruit and flowers galore. You could have a photographic holiday on those. And Quito is ringed by volcanoes. At the time we were there, nothing was active, no volcanic ash spewing and lava. But this one did get active a few years ago, so that's always a risk there. Right off the bat, you go to the botanical garden near the hotel where we were, and you begin seeing beautiful creatures. The summer tanagers that you can see, you know, southern Mexico and many other places were there in the park, and just lovely to see them. A lot of tanagers. The hummingbirds in Ecuador blow your mind. We have one here, right? The ruby-throated. Lovely birds, they're fun to have around. But imagine 156 different species of hummingbirds. Every day was another one, or another 2 or 3 or 4. This bird is the equivalent of the robin. It's called the great thrush, same family. They're not as pretty as a robin, but boy can they sing. And you see them and hear them everywhere you go. Even in the jungle you can find some of those. So the day we went up to Papayacta Pass, this was my second day in Ecuador. So I've gone from sea level, actually I live at 50 feet above sea level here. I landed at 9,400 feet. Mary gets migraines, fortunately was able to fight them off. And suddenly I'm going up to 12,500, and I find out we're going to go another 1,000 feet above that. I'm tromping around in the bush all day long with my guide, who was 20 years old and lives at 10,000 feet. Not a good test? That was a test.
Can I just say for reference, in the Air Force, 10,000 feet is when you must wear an oxygen mask.
Yeah, you get about half the oxygen at 10,000 feet.
And they gave us a writing exercise to write our name at 15,000. You couldn't see it.
You couldn't do it. I did some exercise before I went, believe me, because I knew it wasn't going to be easy. What's interesting is as you drive, even from 10,000 up to 13,000, how the habitat changes. And of course the wildlife changes as the habitat changes. So on the way up we saw these beautiful wildflowers, but we saw this hummingbird. This is a female, so it was all we could do to see her in this bush that she's in. I've magnified this considerably, but if I'd showed you the raw image, you'd have trouble picking her out. But look at the tail on this beautiful little hummingbird here. And this guy, the black flower piercer, you may not see it here unless you're close. He's got a little hook on the end of his beak. And he doesn't go into the flower to get nectar as the hummingbirds do. He goes to the base of it, opens a hole, and drains the nectar into his mouth. Very clever. And this just some of the scenery up on top there. So, raptors. You know, anywhere you go you want to see raptors. They're big, they're dramatic, they're colorful, and we were lucky that day. This little insignia that you see here just indicates I'm going to go right to left, okay? Clockwise. This is a variable hawk, similar in size and configuration to the broad-winged hawk that we have here. If any of you are birders. Same kind of habitat, same kind of food that they're looking for. There were a lot of rabbits around. I was surprised how many rabbits we saw, and those guys would scarf them up in a heartbeat. This is a lovely bird, the Cinereus harrier. It's like the northern harriers, we'll see here occasionally, but long tail, wide, narrow wings, a beautiful gliding creature to see. And then the black-chested buzzard eagle. It's not as big as the bald eagle, but they're still sizable birds. This is not my photo, I wish it was. It's a spectacular image, and it just shows you, you know, how big and graceful they are. I mentioned habitat diversity, and Ecuador is that in spades. To the credit of the Ecuadorian people, they realize, as Costa Rica has done, that it's important to protect their habitat. Their economy is not strong. About 50% of the people are unemployed or underemployed. So tourism is a huge factor for them. And what brings tourists to Ecuador? Wildlife and scenery. So they're smart enough to understand they've got to protect the wonderful habitat there. And you see these beautiful birds. I mean, I got a picture of one of these guys off the side of the road. I couldn't believe it. You know, anywhere else you'd be thrilled to see a bird that colorful. The yellow-breasted brush finch, another very, very handsome creature. These guys are funny, the antpedas. We're going to talk about those a little bit more later, but they look like stuffed footballs on these little spindly legs. You're going to see some more of them. You hear them everywhere. They're out in the bush calling, but they're hard to see. I was very lucky. One of these came out of the bush and stood in the road for a minute and then skittered off out of the way. But I'm going to show you some others that are very particular birds. And when you get up at 12,000 feet, there are ducks, very particular ducks. Teal, similar to the blue-winged teal or the green-winged teal that we have here. But they live at high elevations. This was one of the disappointments of the trip. If I'd been there the day earlier, you know how this goes, you should have been here yesterday. When we were way up on top of the mountain, there's a ranger station there, and he said if you were here yesterday, you would have seen a sow and a cub wander across the field out there. But they don't have many. There's only about 3,000 of these bears left. Their closest cousin is the panda. You see the short nose compared to the black bears that we have here. So I was unlucky, but unfortunately they have unregulated hunting still taking place there, even though it's a protected bear. Now here's some real good fortune. I wanted to show you this just to give you an idea that the terrain up there on top of the pass. I mean, this is not a place you're going to go walking around unless you're in pretty good shape and equipped. This is an Andean condor, and one of them drifted over us. The guide just about fainted because they're not common in the area where we were. There's only a few thousand of them left, similar size to the California condors that we have out west, those that we're trying to bring back. They haven't fallen as far in numbers as the California condor did. You may remember they were down to 22 birds at one point. But still a thrill to see these. We saw some in Argentina as well. A 10-foot wingspan on the condor. And this was also very lucky. This is way up on top. You're well above the tree line in an area we would call tundra, but they call the paramo. Paramo. That's what this terrain is like, low bushes on the ground and so on. And this is a rufous-bellied seed snipe. Very rare. The guide told me we have a 1 in 10 chance of seeing this bird. So we walked around for an hour up on top trying to find the bird. He was frustrated, of course. He wanted to show it to me. And he started to give up, and I walked over near where the car was parked with my camera to get a scenery shot, something. I looked down, and 10 feet in front of me is one of these birds. He didn't see it. So he was, you know, what does it look like, Ed? How big is it? He wanted to confirm that we actually did see the bird. Okay, so we went over the pass in the afternoon, and we went down about 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the beginning of what's called the cloud forest. Cloud forest is an area where they have, not all the time, but very regular fog banks, clouds and rain. Different terrain as a result, and very different habitat and birds to show it. It's the only place on earth where you can see this beauty, the sword-billed hummingbird. Look at the length of that bill. The bill is longer than the hummingbird's body. It's adapted to very specific plants that it can get and other hummingbirds can't reach. Mother Nature at work. I love these little sun angels. There's a number of different sun angels, but look at the iridescence on that bird. And then the long-tailed sylph. This is one of the favorite hummingbirds. Notice the bill is quite short, but boy does he make up with it with that tail. There were about 40 different species of hummingbirds at this lodge. They had feeders all over the place, and you could see amazing numbers of birds. Along the river by this lodge, there was also some spectacular wildlife on offer. Compare this to our blue jay. I mean, he is pretty spectacular in color. Similar sound. I heard him before I saw him. And they make the same raucous call and noise out in the brush. How about this guy, the gray hooded bush tanager? Now, during breeding season, that gray turns this lovely lavender color. But even with gray, he would be a handsome bird. This guy's interesting. We think of herons as standing out in the marsh, okay? Very quiet water, standing quietly or wading slowly and picking game that way. These guys spend a lot of time in the tree overlooking the river. That's where I first saw them. And then they go down into very fast water and they're fishing in the river. It's a totally different behavior pattern than the herons that we're used to in this country. I wanted to make sure that I illustrated for you the diversity of wildlife in Ecuador. We were not lucky enough to see any of these predators, but I wanted to show them to you so you at least have an appreciation of who lives there and who balances the ecology. Ocelots, gorgeous little cats. Unfortunately, they're still hunted illegally because people in Africa and China are willing to pay too much for their pelts. They're hunted for their fur. The Andean fox is quite diverse and spread all over South America. I didn't see one in Patagonia, and I wasn't lucky enough to see one in Ecuador, but that's what happens when you're on a tour. You can't go where you want all the time. These guys, jaguars, and the melanistic version of them. You've probably seen pictures of TV, or on TV, of the black jaguar. That's the same cat. They still display those rings under the very dark fur. Again, hunted for their fur, very few of them left. If I had seen one of those two cats, I would have been really excited. Okay, so I mentioned the two preserves that I went to. This is a fun day. You have to be in a blind, a wooden blind set up in the middle of this cloud forest. Very moist, very humid, muddy, rains every day there. You have to be in the blind by 5:30. And there were room for 6 greenhorns like me with our guides behind us. And you better be quiet because you're waiting for this bird to show up. This is probably the most famous bird in Ecuador, the cock of the walk, as he's called. And the guide said, you'll start hearing him at 6:15. I said, 6:15? And sure enough, at 6:15 we heard the first bird call. It's a very raucous, loud call. It doesn't even sound like a bird, but there they were. And it ended up we saw 7 males and just 1 female. The boys, of course, were putting on a show for this female, and she was having none of it. She paid no attention to the boys. But that helped because they were willing to come close to us and we were able to get photos of them. Now we're back to the antpitas, 3 different species. There are 6 in this preserve. You're lucky if you see 2 or 3 of them in a day. They live in deep cover. They only move in the dark or you know, in the early and late light, and they're very, very shy. I was lucky enough to see all 6 of them. My guide was beside himself. This is the giant antpita. He would be about that big, and you know, he probably came within 3 or 4 feet of us when we were standing there. Same shape, but different coloration as that tawny I showed you before. This guy, the chestnut crown, he's very petite and moving constantly, very nervous little bird. But look at the legs and the feet on that guy. And then the scaled antpitta. This guy, oh, I actually misspelled that, not anti-pita, antpitta. This bird was within 3 feet of me. I was very lucky to see him so close and got some good pictures. Tanagers, you know, if you go to Ecuador, or excuse me, Costa Rica, you go to Guatemala, a place like that, you're going to see tanagers. Like the warblers here, there's vast diversity among the tanagers, and I wasn't disappointed. I saw a number of different ones here. This guy is called the golden naped tanager. He actually has a gold patch on the back of his head, but he's got a pretty chest and face, so I wanted to show you that. The golden tanagers, they really shine. They're like a Baltimore Oriole in terms of coloration. And then this guy, the blue-necked tanager. More hummingbirds. They took me to this place called the Alambi Preserve. We had lunch sitting on the veranda, and arrayed in front of us were about 20 hummingbird feeders. Now, I don't know about you, I'm used to seeing one hummingbird on a feeder here, because what happens if another one shows up? They fight. They chase each other, and they're really aggressive birds. Here, it wasn't unusual to see 6, 8, 10 hummingbirds on one feeder simultaneously. With good luck keeping track of them, trying to identify them, make notes, take photographs of them, because of course they're moving constantly like hummingbirds do. But it was a feast for the eyes. Some of them would stay for a while, like this beautiful white-necked Jacobin. I was able to get a good photograph of him, and this female great green-crowned brilliant. Now, these two are not my pictures. I have pictures of these birds, but not nearly as good as these. Look at this bird, the white-booted racket tail. Now, I don't know who came up with the name, but it pretty well says it all. But what a spectacular set of feathers on that little bird. It's only about this tall, you know, so delicate. And then the purple-bibbed white tip. Again, very descriptive. Purple, white. But try to identify them when they're buzzing around. I saw 20 different species of hummingbirds in an hour over lunch. That's how exciting it was. Other species, again, I didn't see any of these. I would have been lucky to see any of them, but more diversity. This is a member of the weasel family. It's called a tayra. And what creature around here does it remind you of?
Awesome. Fisher.
Fisher, exactly. Similar size, similar habits. It's mostly nocturnal, very aggressive hunter. It's in the weasel family, as I mentioned, but obviously we didn't see one. This is a cute little guy, the kinkajou. You've probably seen them on National Geographic specials. Notice the long tail. They're like a possum. They walk with this long tail up in the air, but they can wrap it around a tree limb and swing by it or hang by it. They've got kind of a teddy bear look to them, mostly nocturnal. Those big eyes tell you that it's a nocturnal creature. And then their version of a deer. They have whitetails down there at lower elevations, just like ours. They're spreading their territory. But this is the native deer called the red brocket deer. Much smaller, about 60 pounds. Okay, so that's the mainland. So now, well, up in the mountainous area. Now we're going to the Amazon. I don't know about you, but when I think of the Amazon, I think of a lot of rain, very lush foliage, mosquitoes carrying you away, all these amazing jungle creatures, and we were lucky. We had plenty of foliage around, but it did not rain on us. We never put on our rain gear. I didn't see a single mosquito. It was fairly dry when we were there, and obviously that's good news. You don't want some of the diseases that mosquitoes can carry in that part of the world. This handsome guy is Diego, our fantastic tour guide, just the sweetest fellow on earth, couldn't do enough for us. And the lodge. We approached the lodge on a back canal off the main river, the Coca River, And this is the gathering space, and then there's a series of little cabins where we stayed. It was a real pleasant place to be for a few days.
What time of the year was that?
We were there in February. Diversity again. I could show you 1,000 insects and invertebrates and things of that sort, and only scratch the surface. The diversity there is mind-boggling. When we came back from our first boat ride out to check out some habitat, this guy was waiting for us on the sidewalk. Tarantula. Probably that big. Notice these beautiful pink toes. It looks like he's just been to the hairdresser to get a thing. Not aggressive at all. They said you could pick it up and handle it, you know, it would not bite you. None of us volunteered to do that. These guys were everywhere. The leaf cutter ant. Now you think ants. What's the big deal about ants? There must be godzillions of these ants there because they're constantly pruning the vegetation. They create openings as they do this. They allow the trees to breathe and create oxygen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It has been estimated that over the span of a year, the leafcutter ants remove 25% of the vegetation in the Amazon.
Whoa.
It grows back very quickly, of course. This is the cycle of life. They carry them back to their underground dens, and they chew them up. It becomes food for them, but it forces the tree to constantly regenerate and grow. Fascinating creature. You'd see them everywhere you went. They were lined up on the path. Millipedes. If you're into critters like this, you could have a field day down there. Again, none of us handled this because some of these guys can give a wicked bite. If you remember one of the James Bond movies, they put a millipede in his bed and it crawled up his chest and he held perfectly still. Butterflies. You could do a presentation on butterflies in the Amazon. We saw all kinds of them, but this one really stood out. They were always flying about over the little river channels as we were moving around the boat. Spectacular, and the size of them, I mean, an adult would be about that big. Bird life, very unusual bird life. This is a russet-backed oropendola. We didn't see them very often. They make a heck of a racket in the morning, and you were constantly seeing them flying around the trees, making noise and stuff, but it's a pretty cool looking bird. This one takes the cake, as far as I'm concerned. There's a great potu, which is this one, and then there's a smaller one that I saw when I was in the Alambi Preserve. He's only about this tall. This guy, from head to tail, is almost 3 feet long. And it's like an owl in terms of its habits, okay? It's nocturnal, it hunts creatures of the night, it makes a funny horn-sounding call at night. We heard them a couple of nights, but its camouflage is mind-boggling. And they either take this pose where he looks like a branch, or they will get up against a branch and they're almost indistinguishable. We spent half an hour in the boat one day trying to get everybody in the group to see one of these guys up against a big tree like a cottonwood that has very rough bark, and you can see why it's hard to distinguish him. But for those of you that can't see clearly, I mean, his tail is down here, his feet are here on the branch. This is his neck. He has this very high forehead with these eyes closed, and this big bill like an owl. Fantastic creatures. We had nothing like that. And then these guys, everywhere we went, they were in the forest above us, calling and shrieking and howling and stuff, but you didn't see them very often. They were elusive. But I like this picture because it describes the way they act. They're raucous. Now snakes. I know you would have been disappointed if I didn't have snake photos. If anybody needs to leave, this would be a good time.
I'm getting a cough drop.
We didn't see any. I was a little disappointed, although some of the snakes in the Amazon, I'm pretty glad that we didn't run into any of them, because there's a lot of them, and some of them are serious snakes. I picked 3 at random just to show you the variety there. This guy is about 3 feet long, and no real harm to us. If he bites you, I'm told it's like a serious bee sting, maybe a hornet or yellow jacket. But if you're a little lizard or if you're an insect of some sort, then of course that's deadly for them. This is the green anaconda, largest snake on earth, up to 22 feet long, 400 pounds. And some people keep these as pets. You see pictures of them carrying them around their neck. I'm thinking,
Weird.
I'm not sure I'd do that. I sure wouldn't go to sleep with it. But, you know, they were there. We just didn't encounter them. Our guide was this fantastic small native called Winter. Unfortunately, his English was very limited and my Spanish is limited, so I couldn't get all of the information out of him I would have loved to have, but he was incredible. He knew so much about the jungle and the creatures in it. I noticed everywhere we went, his eyes were constantly scanning to see who's here, and he was carrying a very sharp machete. If he'd seen one of these snakes, I think he would have gone into action, obviously to protect us. This one is no joke, the fer de lance, one of the most dangerous snakes on earth, massive amounts of venom, destroys tissue, causes all kinds of nerve damage, and will kill you very quickly if you don't get emergency help and antitoxin. They are not big snakes. I mean, they're like a rattlesnake, you know, 4 to 6 feet at maturity, but they're very aggressive. They're not retiring like most of our snakes are. They want to defend territory, and they will come at you. Most of the snake bites in the Amazon are from this snake. I'm glad we didn't encounter one. More birds, just quickly. The toucans. Lots of different toucans out there with wild colors and wildly shaped bills. I love this one, the aracari. They don't pronounce that with C, it's S, aracari. We heard them calling all the time, but only saw a couple of them. And then this guy, the hoatzin. They call it the stinky turkey. It looks a little bit like a turkey, as you can see, but the head is quite small and has these funny crown feathers there. But apparently, they do stink. And they don't eat these birds, as they would lots of others if they could get their hands on them. And we'd hear them squawking out in the woods every morning. Okay, more creatures. We did see these guys because they hang around camp and they love to come into the areas where there's food served. And they can actually be quite aggressive. I had one day that I thought was going to come right up my leg, and I kept shooing him away with my foot and speaking to him, and he kept coming back, and finally I had to just, you know, push him with my shoe to keep him away. It's about the size of a guinea pig or a big gopher, but they were assertive. This is similar to our raccoon, the coatimundi. Similar habitat, similar behavior, similar diet to a raccoon. Didn't see one. And then this guy, the giant anteater. One thing you're going to see in the Amazon is plenty of ants and termites. Magnificent, huge mounds and tree nests that would be, you know, I mean, they would take up that whole area where Dan is sitting back there. It's amazing the trees can stand up them. So these guys had plenty to eat.
How big is the anteater?
Oh, I think from toe to tail he'd be 5 feet. They're big, really big. They have smaller ones, and they have armadillos like we do, but that guy's called giant for a reason. Lizards everywhere. I mean, and dozens and dozens of species. I couldn't begin to tell you all the different species that we saw. But they're eating a lot of insects, so they play quite a role in the forest there. Turtles, we didn't see many turtles. I'm a little surprised, but that may be because there's plenty of these guys around, the caimans. They have two varieties of the caiman, and one night they took us on a cruise in a dugout canoe back in this big wetland area. We had gone there about 5 o'clock. Sunset is at 6:30 in the Amazon every day year round because it's on the equator. Sunrise is at 6:30. Not surprising. But they took us on this dark cruise with no lights, no talking. The idea was to enjoy the lightning bugs. They have lightning bugs down there, to enjoy the stars, and to listen to the amazing sounds of the jungle around you. Mary's cruising along in the boat with her finger in the water, like this. And the guide says, "Mary, you might want to pick your hand up." Because there are caimans in the water here. She very quickly got her hand out of the water.
You're
Monkeys.
cruising just with paddles, or there's an engine, or for the
Paddles.
quiet? Yeah.
Paddles, but they were moving just minimally and paddling beautifully, very quietly as we circled this island in the middle of the wetland.
How
It was
many
actually a lot of fun.
How many tourists and how many guides?
I'm sorry?
How many tourists and how many guides?
There were 11 in our group and one overall guide, Diego that I showed you, and then this native guide we had in the Amazon winter. That was it. But it was a nice small group. We really enjoyed it. Good people. We had a lot of fun. Monkeys. There's a lot of different monkeys down there. Of course, many of them are threatened because of deforestation, hunting, and all the standard problems on our Earth. These guys are a fascinating coat. Didn't see one, didn't hear one. The red howler monkey was in the area. I heard one morning. They start about 4 a.m. In Costa Rica, there's a black howler monkey, and they were really noisy every morning when you were in the jungle areas. Again, we didn't see one of these. But these guys, the squirrel monkeys, they were all over. They have plantain on a table or a bench for them, of course, to attract them for tourists. And these guys were constantly fighting, tumbling, squabbling, running up and down this steel cable and the tree behind them. They were a lot of fun to watch. Okay, so now the Galapagos. I've kept you waiting long enough. The Galapagos Islands are 600 miles west of Ecuador, okay, out in the Pacific. And there are very specific currents in the ocean. The Humboldt current comes from Antarctica to the Galapagos and back, okay, like our Gulf current. And then there's the Pacific current that warms the coast of Baja and so on. Those two giant currents meet at the Galapagos and create tons of food in the ocean. That's why there's whales there and porpoises and all the other creatures. But it's what keeps the climate interesting with storms, etc. The Galapagos were isolated until they started going there in the 1600s. And if you've all heard anything about Darwin, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, because it was so isolated, it had the opportunity to evolve without the impact of man. We screw up everything we touch, right? And certainly the Galapagos has suffered some of that. All credit to the Ecuadorian people. 97% of the Galapagos are a national park. They only allow settlements, and they're small settlements, on 3 islands. All the other islands are uninhabited and will remain so. And there's very limited immigration. There's only 12,000 people living there, and they're going to cap it. We can't just decide to go live in the Galapagos. They reserve it. And we can't go there and work either. That's restricted for local people. I think it is a very good idea. Just to show you the geology, they're all formed by volcanoes. And volcanic island formation is still taking place. We could see the beginning of one offshore in one area, just like the Hawaiian Islands or Tahiti. you know, this is an active area geologically, and the way the Galapagos look today will be very different from how it looks 1,000 years from now. Some massive craters on some of the islands there, but almost all of the soil you see there is, you know, black sand, red sand, the minerals coming out of these volcanoes. And it's a pretty spectacular place if you're into geology. Just wanted to show you our visit. The itinerary for a tour is controlled by the park. You don't just set off to go to Fernandina Island, for instance. You have to register. Most of the boats are local boats with local guides, and every day they check in with the tourist authorities to make sure there's been no change. And you go where you're told, and you appear on the island when you're told, and you leave the island when you're told. They do this to protect the island and the creatures that live on these islands, and it obviously makes great sense. Some of these are very fragile. So our itinerary looked like the captain was a little bit dyslexic, but you know, that's where we went. And we got to see some real diversity. I was disappointed not to get to this island because this is where the penguins live and some other birds that are very unique there, but it didn't matter in the scheme of things. What I will say about the Galapagos, I prepared as much as I could ahead of time, read several books, went through the wildlife guides, etc., etc. Nothing prepares you for what you see there because it is so unique and so special and so well preserved in the scheme of things. So this is our ship, room for 16 passengers, crew of 8. As I said, there were just 11 of us, so it was very comfortable. The biggest ships allowed are 100 passengers. There was a National Geographic ship when we were there. They had 100 passengers on it. Most of the sailing is done at night, so they're not disturbing wildlife, and it makes the islands quieter, more comfortable.
Did you come out of Guayaquil in the boat, or did you fly out there?
You can't fly directly into the Galapagos. This is one of the things they're doing to manage tourism. I won't say restrict. You have to go to Quito or Guayaquil by plane, and then you can go to the Galapagos from there. But they're limiting tourism, they're limiting hotel development. Airbnb has caused them some problems now because people are converting, and I'm sure they'll put some restrictions on that at some point. See that red beach, isn't that gorgeous? Okay, Darwin. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's important here because we've all learned a little bit about this, and I just want to frame the discussion. He was only 22 years old when he was asked to fill in for another naturalist who couldn't continue a voyage that had already been started in 31. So he joined in 1832. It was a 5-year voyage. He was only on the ship for 18 months because of the route they took. He would get on and off the boat and spend time on land visiting friends or specific areas. He spent 5 weeks in the Galapagos, and it eventually changed his life and changed how we think of science, of course. He published the journal of his notes in 1839, one of 4 volumes on the whole voyage. It was funded by the government. And he didn't publish his thoughts on evolution until 1845. Other people were starting to talk about aspects of that because of the samples he collected and the observations that he published. In those days, they didn't go and just look at birds and take pictures of birds. They would shoot dozens of them or hundreds of them, preserve them, take them back to England. They'd be dissected and studied for years and years and years. That was standard practice in those days. His formative book on the origin of species was not published until 20 years later. And he nearly missed out on that because somebody else was about to publish very similar work based on Darwin's observations in the Galapagos. You may have heard about the finches. He identified 25 or 26 birds down there. 25 of them turned out later to be unique. And they didn't have DNA testing in those days. He was just using his eyes to try to understand what was going on there. And he noticed all of these birds appeared similar, but they had distinct differences among them, particularly their beaks. If you can just look at those beaks for a minute, they all have the same ancestor. But because they're isolated on these islands, and most of them don't move around very much, they evolved over 1 million years to that specific habitat, the food that was available and the environment. This one, very interesting bird, it actually uses tools to pull termites and ants out of cracks in a tree. That's very rare behavior in the natural world. So I just wanted to illustrate a few of the finches. I didn't see all of them. It's hard to see some of them. We're not allowed in some areas, of course. They move around. I did the best I could, as much as anything, just to try to understand it. But look at the difference. Now, this is a large ground finch from islands in the north. See the shape of that bill? He's only slightly larger than this medium ground finch from central and eastern islands, but notice how different the bill is. And the coloration's different as well. And then you get to this little guy, the green warbler finch. They live in the central islands. See how small his beak is, and the coloration, of course, is very different. And then that woodpecker finch. So this was at a time when science knew nothing about this. Nobody had postulated evolution, how it happened. Darwin began to have the beginnings of his theory simply because of what he observed on the ground. It was pretty spectacular.
How did he know that they all had a common ancestor? I mean, they could have had 3.
He
how would he do
didn't,
that?
but from his observation and his mental meanderings, he began to wonder, I'm seeing all these unique creatures here that I didn't see on the mainland, I didn't see in Chile, I didn't see in Panama, the other places where they stopped. He was seeing creatures that were completely unique. And yet they had some similarities among them within the islands. So it caused him to start thinking, how did this happen? What explains what I'm seeing on the ground with my eye? It's quite a leap of intellect, I think. Yeah. Yes?
And just to be, I'm assuming he was correct, that there is just one ancestor for those?
DNA testing confirms that.
Were they the same species?
Well, they're now considered unique species, but if you go back to the family tree, they're
Can
common.
they breed, can they take two different islands and breed them?
Some of the islands are close enough that birds can move, so that's why you would see one on 2 or 3 islands. But others are far enough removed, small birds, particular habitat, they don't leave an island. Now, unfortunately, that's beginning to show the end of some of these birds. They know that some have gone extinct. I wanted to illustrate the 4 different species of mockingbirds in the Galapagos. I was lucky enough to see all 4. They live in similar but unique habitats, different food. Notice the coloration, how it varies. And again, look at the beaks. They are adapted for the terrain and the habitat and the prey on the islands where they have lived all of these years. This one is in serious trouble. Floriana Island is not a big island, and I've read that they actually no longer live on Floriana. They're reduced to an islet that can't be more than 10 acres or 20 acres offshore from Floriana. I saw 3 of these guys. The estimate is that there can't be more than 100 of them left. And there's no way they're going to be able to sustain themselves in that environment. So this is really fascinating science and natural history when you think about it. You go to the Galapagos to see boobies. Now, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but
Blue-footed.
boobies are a big deal in the Galapagos for a very good reason. They're everywhere. If you're a booby kind of person, you'll have fun there. This is the world-famous blue-footed booby. Now, is there any reason to doubt that they have blue feet? And this long bill, very unique coloring here. And just in case there's not enough variety for you with blue-footed, you can find red-footed boobies, like this. What's amazing about the Galapagos is that because they manage tourism so carefully, You can walk up to these species so close you cannot believe it. Imagine walking up to a robin or a great blue heron or a bird you see in your yard or the wetland next to you and being able to reach out and touch it. How often does that happen here? Very rarely. There you can't touch them. You are very specifically monitored to make sure you're not touching or feeding wildlife. Thank goodness. I actually had circumstances where birds were so close to me I couldn't take a picture. Imagine that. I have a picture I've seen online of a guy with a telephoto lens with a hood on it, and there's a finch perched inside the hood looking in the camera. They're naive to humans because there's no predation. They're not at risk. They're not being harmed by humans. This is another booby called the Nazca booby, and I illustrated this one rather than adult. They're startling black and white. This is a juvenile sitting on the nest. Now this nest is not exactly an architect's dream. It's just a pile of sticks on the ground somewhere. But you can see how fuzzy they are as they develop. And they were all over the islands, you know, flapping their wings, starting to fledge. But boobies drive the tourism industry down there. There were 1,000 different T-shirts and trinkets, boobies, 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 everything.
Do they feed mostly in the sea?
Do they what?
Do they feed mostly in
Yes.
the ocean?
Like gannets and like the cormorants here, they go aloft and then they dive like a rocket into the water. Here's one that did that and now he's starting to fly away. This is a blue-footed. This is a blue-footed again. You'll notice he's just standing there with his mouth open. Most of the boobies are not exactly thrilling creatures to watch. You know, this is the level of activity. But you can walk right up to them. And if it's hot, they do this to ventilate, just like a dog will do. Standard pose here. Look at this guy. This is how they rest or sleep. They lean forward with their head in the crotch of a tree or on a branch. Sometimes their head is well below their feet. Can't be the most comfortable position, but that's the choice.
Are they there year round, or do they,
Yeah.
they don't go,
Year round.
they don't go offshore?
And what's interesting here, you prompted me, thank you, Rob. You know, the breeding season can be all year as well because the climate doesn't change seasonally. They don't have the changes as we do here. So you know, you could see boobies by the thousands in some of the places we went. Flycatchers, there were a few of these little guys around, beautiful little birds. You could hear them often before you'd see them. The Galapagos hawk is a very rare bird. We managed to see two one day on an island, and they feed on the seabirds, and we didn't get to see any in the air. They were perched on rocks, but pretty cool birds. They're about the size of a Cooper's hawk that we would have around here. The doves are pretty magnificent compared to the mourning doves we have here, for instance. Beautiful coloration. And then the Galapagos short-eared owl, very similar to the short-eared owl we have here, but it's a different species. And we saw two of them, very lucky one day. I was scanning the terrain with my binoculars before we gave up on this island, and I said, there's an owl. Then I turned around a couple minutes later, there was another one flying through. They were picking off small seabirds. More birds on the shoreline. I won't spend a lot of time here. We have oyster catchers in the Gulf and out west and so on, and you would see them down there. Flamingos, just like you might see in Florida and places like that. We watched 5 of them one day for half an hour. They're just amazing creatures. Yellow-crowned herons, very interesting birds and hard to film, hard to approach. I was about 3 feet from this bird when I took that picture. Try that here. You're never going to get that close.
And I saw 2 pairs of oyster catchers out on Pond Island.
Did you?
Today, well, Elm Island and Ram Island, there's
Okay.
a couple of pairs.
Yeah, they're not common here. In Iceland, we saw tons of the Eurasian oyster catcher. And then the crabs, these are kind of cool, the amazing coloration on these guys. And, you know, just like crabs everywhere, they skitter back and forth when you come in, but still, you could get pretty close to them. A few more birds. Red-billed tropic bird, spectacular creature with that long tail, some of them longer than that. There was actually one visiting offshore islands in Maine for 15, 16 years, but it hasn't showed up for the last couple of years. I love these guys. Imagine standing like that for an extended period of time. My wife can do it, but I sure. Pelicans, they have a brown pelican, not the white pelicans that we're used to. And then the noddy, they're kind of a cross between a gull and a tern. Beautiful birds in flight and raucous, constantly screaming and fighting and quarreling among themselves. Sea lions, you know, people go to Hawaii to swim with the dolphins. If you go snorkeling here, you're going to be swimming with the sea lions because they're everywhere and they're not at all afraid of you. Sometimes you'd be snorkeling along and, you know, this sea lion would zip by and another one go over your back, and it was really quite fun to see them. Obviously they do a lot of sleeping, but to see the little guys around, that was a lot of fun. And more of them. This is a nursery area where there were a lot of adults and juveniles resting on an island. Sea turtles. Like turtles everywhere in the ocean, they've been overhunted, pollution, discarded nets, all of the sins that man has visited upon turtles and tortoises, these guys have suffered from it. They're protected, but you know, that doesn't stop people from killing them for subsistence living. You'd see this quite often out when you were cruising to the island in our little dinghies to land on a beach somewhere. This is a turtle riding on a turtle, not necessarily mating, but just kind of pairing up and having a ride in the afternoon kind of thing. They were everywhere in a couple of the islands where we were. Again, you're not supposed to touch them. One day I was snorkeling in a fairly rough sea, and it was one underneath me eating algae off the rocks. A wave pushed me down at the same time this turtle came up, and suddenly I'm astraddle the turtle. And I was like, whoa, man. Didn't bother him in the least. And every day we would see signs where the adults had climbed up the beach to lay their eggs. We didn't see any evidence of babies at that time, but 1 in 1,000 of them will survive. Imagine that. So, this was a story I wanted to share with you. Obviously, sharks are out there, of course, lots of different species. This is the predominant species, and also a form of the hammerhead called the scalloped hammerhead. At night, the ship would turn on the lights on either side, and you could sit in the lounge and look over the side and see sharks swimming in the water, which is kind of cool unless you're thinking of going for a swim. At times you'd see 30 or 40 sharks circling the boat. And that was fine until one night when a school of flying fish showed up. I've never seen flying fish, but they're a lot bigger, at least this species was a lot bigger than what we saw. And the fish itself is probably 2 foot long, and the wingspan 3 feet. They're big, and they come skittering over the surface. Well, you can imagine the impact on these sharks. And we got to watch a lot of flying fish bite the dust as these sharks would go. There's a hammerhead here, you can see one in the rest of the blacktip. That was quite a spectacle, and I guarantee you everybody stepped back from the edge of the ship at that point.
Did the sharks leap up for them, or did the birds
Oh yeah,
fly so low?
oh yeah. The flying fish, you know, they're kind of porpoising along the surface, but they've got to touch at some point, and the sharks obviously are skilled at catching them. You'd get 3 or 4 sharks swirling in an area, and bang, one of them would be gone. Lots of rays. We saw them nearly every beach we went to. They're not dangerous to humans, and there are lots of other rays as well, but these we saw pretty commonly. The whale shark is the largest shark on Earth, harmless to humans, like the baleen whales, you know, they swim their mouth open to catch prey. They're known to breed off the Galapagos. And then the blue whale is known to congregate there because of those ocean currents and the food availability there. Plus sperm whales and humpbacks and others as well. Snorkeling was pretty darn good there. You know, unfortunately, most places you go nowadays, the coral is destroyed or a shadow of its former beauty, and not so many fish around as the coral dies off. But we saw a lot of different fish when we were snorkeling there. And we snorkeled almost every day, sometimes twice in a day. I mean, these guys, the Moorish idol, is a spectacular fish. Several forms of the parrotfish, and then the king angelfish, one of my favorites in the water. They're beautiful. Seahorses out there, they're rare. They're struggling because of pollution and other problems. One of the guys spotted a moray. I didn't happen to see it, but plenty of them. And then this fish, they were prevalent here, the Panamanic Sergeant Major. I guess because of the stripes on the fish. That's quite a name for a fish. And now the tortoises. I know you've been waiting patiently to see the tortoises. Originally, they think there were 300 to 400,000 tortoises across all of the islands. Guess what we did? We killed a lot of them. Not surprisingly, when a ship would show up, they needed fresh food, meat. There was not much else to eat there that they were interested in or that they could catch, so they killed tortoises. They would also put them on their ships because the tortoise would live for weeks on the ship, so you had the equivalent of a refrigerated meat supply. Bad luck for the tortoises, of course. So they now have a research center, and their goal is to repopulate the islands to what they think would be the original numbers of tortoises. There's 11, some people say 13 different species. I couldn't tell the difference. You'd have to really spend a lot of time there. But here's a little one about this big that was at the research center we visited. That was really interesting to see how they were managing them. And we had all the different size gradients in different pens. This is another one that looked like he was getting to the size that they might consider releasing him. And then these two guys, after we went to the research center, they took us to this ranch. I pictured seeing 5 giant tortoises in a pen, and that would be the end of it. We went to this ranch, and there were hundreds of them everywhere, in the fields with cattle, knocking down the fences, crossing the road, blocking the road, walking by the restaurant. They were in profusion. So we didn't lack for tortoises. This guy was trying to breed with this female. Their male appendage is on the end of the tail. So he actually bends it around and tries to make the connection to the female. Despite his size, he was too small to make the connection with the female. Her shell protruded enough that he couldn't get the job done. And he made a lot of noise trying, and she very patiently waited him out.
Size matters.
He had to find a smaller female.
Viagra.
Then here's some more. They don't move very fast, so they're easy to photograph, and you could get as close to them as you wanted without touching them. I love the look on these guys. 175-year-old tortoise. That's pretty impressive. This guy had his head underwater the whole time we were near him. 5 minutes. I don't know whether he's just cooling off, whether he was bashful or whatever. They're not water creatures, they're land tortoises. But for some reason, he wanted his head in the water. So, more creepy crawly stuff, because I know you like the snakes, so now we'll have a little bit of lizard time. Tons of them around, as there were in the Galapagos, and they're almost comical. There's some of the places you see them, like this guy perched up on a fence post. He was just chilling, having a good time. This guy was alert to see what was happening around him. The big news is that you've got land iguanas and marine iguanas. And you'll see them everywhere. These guys are a little more wary, but if you were quiet and moved slowly, you could get close to them. But the marine iguanas, they were everywhere. And, you know, you could sometimes have to chart a path through the iguanas to get to the water. During the breeding season, the male develops this lovely color scheme here. It just seems so funny to see so many of them close at hand.
How long are they?
A full-sized iguana with tail, 3 feet, maybe 4 feet, the really big ones. Frigate birds. These birds were common on the ocean and around a couple of the islands. I just wanted to illustrate them because they're interesting birds. The female here, fairly bland, not so surprising. The juvenile hasn't really developed the coloration of the adult. But the male is the show. You know, during the breeding season, he can inflate this sac on his throat called a gular sac to show how beautiful he is. And you think, okay, that's fine. They would sit there in the trees with that sac inflated, doing nothing else, but just sitting there. You think, come on, guys, you got to put a little more effort into it than this. But apparently the female's selecting based on the stud who looks best with his gular sac inflated. Now, that was the great frigate bird. Their wingspan's about 6 feet, big birds. But there's also the magnificent frigate bird. I don't know who named this bird, but you know, as you'd expect, they're even bigger with wingspans 8 feet or more. Sizable birds. The last day, we attracted a bunch of them to us for some reason. They were following the ship, and I had the chance to shoot about 1,000 photos trying to catch some of these guys in flight near the boat. And I could almost catch them. They came so close. But when the boat's moving and they're moving and the wind is blowing, it's not so easy. But I got some good photos. I don't think these guys are quite so magnificent because the way they feed is to chase other birds until the bird vomits their food, and then the frigate bird scarfs it up. So bad luck for the chicks of the other bird, but that's how these magnificent creatures feed. So, thank you very much.